You don't lack discipline. You don't lack intelligence. And your mind isn't broken if you can't focus anymore. It's not because something is wrong with you. It's because something is awake inside you that no longer agrees with the life you're living. Focus doesn't disappear by accident. It leaves when it's no longer willing to cooperate. And Carl Jung understood this deeply. He believed the psyche withdraws energy from whatever no longer serves the self. Not loudly, not dramatically, but subtly, silently. Through distraction, you sit down to work. Your mind drifts. You try to read. You forget the sentence halfway through. You open one task, then another, and by the end of the day, you feel exhausted without having truly done anything. This isn't laziness. This is psychological refusal. Your mind isn't scattered. It's protesting because focus is not a skill. It's a relationship, and that relationship has been neglected. Jung believed every human being has a psychic center, a place of inner gravity, a point around which attention naturally organizes. When you live in alignment with that center, concentration happens effortlessly, not because you force it, but because nothing inside you is resisting. But when you live far from that center, the psyche fractures. Thoughts pull in different directions. Energy leaks. Attention splinters. And the ego interprets this as a problem to fix. More discipline, more pressure, more control. But the unconscious doesn't respond to force. It responds to meaning. When meaning is missing, focus collapses. That's why you can concentrate effortlessly on things that feel alive, but struggle intensely with things that feel empty. Your mind knows the difference, even when you pretend not to. Distraction is not random. It follows emotional truth. You scroll because stillness feels dangerous. You multitask because depth feels exposing. You avoid silence because silence asks questions you're not ready to answer. And your psyche would rather fragment than confront a life that feels false. Jung warned that when the ego dominates too much, the psyche rebels, not through breakdowns, but through subtle sabotage, fog, restlessness, mental noise. You call it lack of focus. The psyche calls it self-preservation. Because sustained focus requires honesty. It requires you to be present with what you're actually doing, who you're actually becoming, and what you've been avoiding. And many people would rather be distracted than aware. So the mind learns to escape. Every notification trains it. Every comparison reinforces it. Every demand fragments it further, until attention no longer belongs to you. Jung believed modern humans suffer, not from overload, but from disconnection from the self. Your mind is overstimulated, but your inner life is starving. And a starving psyche does not focus. It dissociates. You may notice this most when things slow down. Silence feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels wrong. Doing one thing feels unbearable. So you reach for noise. But noise doesn't restore focus. It numbs the signal. And the signal is simple. Something in your life is misaligned. Focus doesn't disappear when life is hard. It disappears when life is untrue. When you're living according to expectations instead of instinct. When your days are full, but your actions feel hollow. When your energy is spent maintaining an identity that no longer fits. The psyche knows, and it withdraws cooperation. This is why productivity systems fail you. They treat focus as mechanical, but focus is symbolic. It reflects the relationship between ego and soul. If the soul feels ignored, it pulls energy away. If the ego refuses to listen, the psyche refuses to concentrate. This is not punishment. It's correction. Jung called this the self-regulating nature of the psyche. When you drift too far from who you are, the mind stops working smoothly, not to destroy you, but to redirect you. That's why forcing focus feels exhausting. You're not just pushing against distraction. You're pushing against your own unconscious. And the unconscious always wins. You can override it for a while, but not forever. Eventually, something gives, usually your attention. Because attention is psychic currency. Where it flows, reveals what has meaning, and where it refuses to go, reveals where meaning has died. Your inability to focus is not the problem. It's the message. A message that says, slow down, look inward. Something needs to be realigned. Until you listen, the mind will continue to scatter. Not because it's weak, but because it's wise. Your focus didn't disappear overnight. It eroded, slowly, quietly, through compromise. Every time you said yes, when your body said no. Every time you stayed, where your energy wanted to leave. Every time you chose what was expected, over what felt alive. Jung believed attention is tied to libido, not sexual libido. Psychic energy, the force that animates thought, desire, curiosity, presence. When that energy is invested wisely, the mind sharpens. When it's misused, the mind dulls. You feel it as fog, as restlessness, as constant mental noise. Most people think distraction comes from too much input, but Jung saw something deeper. Distraction comes from misdirected energy. Your psyche is spending its fuel, maintaining a life that doesn't match your inner truth. And that is expensive. So the system compensates. It conserves energy by refusing depth. Why concentrate on something that feels meaningless? Why stay present in a role that feels false? Why focus on tasks that move you further from who you are? The psyche doesn't argue. It withdraws. This is why you can focus deeply. When something feels aligned, time disappears. Thoughts organize. Effort feels light. But when alignment is gone, every task feels heavy. Your mind isn't broken. It's tired of pretending. Jung warned that when a person lives too long outside their own nature, the psyche fragments. Not dramatically, but subtly. You lose enthusiasm. You lose patience. You lose the ability to stay with one thing. Because staying would require honesty, and honesty would require change. So the psyche distracts instead. Multitasking becomes a shield. Noise becomes a refuge. You call it productivity, but it's avoidance. Avoidance of feeling. Avoidance of stillness. Avoidance of the quiet question. Why does my life require so much escape? Focus demands presence. Presence demands truth. And truth is uncomfortable when you've outgrown the life you're living. That's why forcing focus never works. You can discipline behavior, but you cannot discipline the unconscious. Jung was clear about this. Whatever is not made conscious will be lived out as fate. In your case, it's lived out as distraction. Your mind drifts because something inside you wants to redirect your life, and it will keep pulling the brakes until you listen. Notice this. Your attention collapses most around obligations that feel hollow, meetings that go nowhere, work that doesn't express you, conversations that stay on the surface. But give your psyche something meaningful, and it wakes up instantly. That's not coincidence. That's diagnosis. The modern world trains you to override this signal. Drink more caffeine. Use better apps. Optimize your time. But optimization without alignment only sharpens the wrong life. Jung believed neurosis arises when the soul is ignored. Today, neurosis looks like constant distraction. You don't feel insane. You feel scattered. But scattering is the symptom of a psyche that no longer can sense. You are trying to focus without asking a deeper question. What deserves my focus? Attention is sacred. Where you place it shapes who you become. And your psyche knows when it's being wasted, so it withholds. This is why boredom feels unbearable now. Boredom used to be fertile, a gateway inward. Now it feels threatening, because boredom removes distraction, and distraction is what keeps the deeper misalignment hidden. Stillness would reveal that something needs to change. So the mind refuses stillness. It jumps, scrolls, checks, anything but stay. Jung would say, your shadow is involved here. The parts of you that want a different life, more meaning, more depth, more truth. But those parts were postponed, suppressed, called unrealistic. So they act indirectly. They sabotage focus. They drain motivation. They pull you away from whatever reinforces the false self. Not to punish you, but to force evolution. Your lack of focus is not a weakness. It's a threshold, a sign that the old structure can no longer hold your energy. Something inside you is ready to reorganize. But reorganization requires courage. It requires asking, what am I doing? That no longer deserves my attention? Who am I being? That no longer feels authentic? What part of me have I been ignoring? To keep the peace? Until those questions are faced, focus will remain fragile, because attention follows integrity. When your life fragments, your mind does too. When your actions align, your focus returns naturally, not through force, through honesty. Focus doesn't return when you try harder. It returns when you stop lying to yourself. Jung believed the psyche reorganizes itself only after truth is acknowledged, not intellectual truth, emotional truth, the kind you feel in your body, before you can explain it in words. Most people lose focus because their days are filled with small betrayals of the self. You wake up tired, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying a life that no longer fits. Your mind scatters because it no longer trusts the direction. Focus requires trust. Trust that what you're doing matters. Trust that your energy is being invested wisely. Trust that staying present won't cost you your soul. When that trust is broken, attention withdraws. So the first restoration is not a technique. It's a reckoning. You must notice where your energy leaks, not dramatically, but daily. Where do you feel resistance? Before you even begin? Where does your body tighten when your mind says yes? Where do you feel relief when something gets canceled? These are not random reactions. They are messages. Jung believed the body is the unconscious made visible. Your inability to focus is already giving you answers. You just haven't listened. Most people try to rebuild focus by controlling the mind, but Jung worked in the opposite direction. He listened to the symptom. Distraction is the psyche speaking in the only language the ego hasn't silenced yet. So instead of fighting distraction, observe it. When does it appear? What does it protect you from? Often, distraction arises right before an uncomfortable realization, a truth about a relationship, a career, a role you've outgrown. The mind escapes to avoid that moment, not because you're weak, because you're not ready to change yet. But readiness grows through awareness. This is where focus begins to return, not as sharp intensity, but as quiet presence. Jung called this recentering. The ego stops chasing control and starts listening. And when listening begins, energy reorganizes. You don't need to eliminate distraction. You need to reduce inner conflict. Every unresolved conflict splits attention. Part of you moves forward. Another part pulls back. The result is paralysis disguised as busyness. True focus emerges when inner parts agree. That agreement comes from alignment. Alignment between what you do and who you are becoming. This is why focus often returns during moments of authenticity, a difficult conversation, a decisive action, a truth finally spoken. Afterward, the mind feels clearer, lighter, because psychic energy is no longer being divided. Jung would say, you have stopped feeding the persona and started feeding the self. The persona wants approval. The self wants wholeness. When you live for the persona, focus becomes fragile. When you live from the self, focus becomes natural. So the practice is simple, but not easy. Each day, ask one honest question. What deserves my attention today? Not what demands it, not what expects it. What deserves it? This shifts focus from obligation to meaning. And meaning is the true anchor of attention. You'll notice something then. You don't need long hours of concentration. You need fewer things that violate your nature. As those are removed, focus consolidates. Not suddenly, gradually. Your mind stops scattering because it no longer needs to escape. Silence becomes tolerable again. Stillness becomes informative. You can sit with one thought without panic. That is the sign. Focus is returning, not as force, but as consent. You are no longer dragging your mind through your life. You are walking with it. And when the psyche feels respected, it offers its full power, clarity, depth, sustained attention, not because you demanded it, but because you've finally earned its trust. Focus returns fully when your life stops resisting itself. Jung believed wholeness is not achieved by adding more, but by removing what fragments you. Your mind has been overloaded, not with information, but with contradictions. You think one thing, you feel another, you do a third. That split is exhausting, and exhaustion destroys focus. The psyche was never designed to live divided, so it responds by dulling awareness, not to punish you, but to protect you from constant inner friction. This is why real focus feels calm, not intense. When attention returns, there is less urgency, less noise, more gravity. You stop chasing stimulation because presence is no longer painful. Jung called this psychic consolidation, the moment when energy stops leaking into internal conflict and gathers at the center. That center is the self, not the image you perform, not the role you maintain, but the core that knows what matters. From this place, focus is not effortful. It's inevitable because your actions and your values are finally aligned. This is why no system can give you lasting focus until you change how you live. You can organize your calendar, optimize your tools, discipline your habits. But if your days contradict your nature, your attention will rebel again and again. So the real work is subtraction, one obligation less. That drains you. One habit less. That numbs you. One false expectation less. That keeps you small. Each removal frees psychic energy, and that energy returns as clarity. This is how focus is rebuilt. Without force, through integrity. When you live honestly, your mind cooperates. When you stop betraying yourself, your attention comes home. Jung believed the self guides us toward individuation, not comfort, not ease, but coherence. Your loss of focus was the signal. That coherence was missing, and now you know why. So don't ask how to focus more. Ask, what in my life is asking to be real? Answer that, and focus will follow, quietly, naturally, without struggle. If this resonated, don't scroll past it. Stay with it. Let it settle. And if you want to continue this work, subscribe to the channel and keep your attention on what helps you become whole, not more productive. Whole. Because when you become whole, focus is no longer a problem. It's a byproduct, and your mind finally rests in the life it was meant to live.